Hey everyone, welcome back to Whispers of the Heart. Today's story is full of secrets, emotions, and one shocking twist you won't see coming. Across 7 parts, you'll uncover hidden truths, heartbreaking moments, and decisions that will leave you speechless. And trust me, the ending, it'll stay with you for a long time. So before we dive in, don't forget to like, share, subscribe, and drop your thoughts in the comments, because this story, it's going to change the way you see kindness forever. Part 1. In the grand Dawson mansion, everything looked perfect. Shining marble floors, golden stair rails, and the quiet sound of servants moving around like shadows. But for little Emma Dawson, the billionaire's daughter, this big house always felt a little empty. Her father was always busy with meetings, and her mother loved parties more than family dinners. Emma often wandered alone through the halls, curious about the people who worked there. That was how she first noticed Mr. Lewis, the old janitor, who always cleaned the floors quietly, never speaking unless someone spoke to him first. His blue uniform looked old, and his hands were rough from years of work, yet his eyes were calm and kind. One afternoon, while Emma was sitting on the stairs, she saw Mr. Lewis cleaning the corner of the hall. His movements were slow, and he looked tired. She watched him for a long time. Everyone else passed him like he was invisible, but Emma couldn't ignore the way he sighed every time he lifted his mop. She stood up, walked closer, and softly said, "Hi." The man looked surprised. "Hello, miss," he said politely, bowing his head a little. "You don't have to call me miss," Emma said, smiling. "My name's Emma." Mr. Lewis smiled back a little shyly. "Nice to meet you, Emma. I'm Mr. Lewis." The next day, Emma saw him again, this time cleaning near the kitchen. She noticed that he didn't have lunch like the other workers. He only drank water and went back to work. She wondered why. Later, when the cook placed extra food on the table, Emma got an idea. She quietly picked up a plate and walked to the hall, where Mr. Lewis was sweeping. She looked around to make sure nobody was watching, then whispered, "Here, you can have this. Nobody will know." Mr. Lewis froze, surprised. "Oh no, Miss Emma, I can't," she interrupted. "Please, you work all day. You must be hungry." For a moment he hesitated, but then he smiled gently and took the plate. "Thank you, Emma," he said softly. "You're very kind." Emma sat beside him on the floor while he ate. It was the first time someone from the mansion had ever done that. She asked him about his life, and he told her little stories, how he used to be a teacher before things went wrong, how his wife was sick, and how he took this job just to pay for her medicine. Emma listened with wide eyes, feeling something she couldn't explain, a mix of sadness and admiration. Every day after that, Emma found ways to help him. Sometimes she brought food, sometimes she just talked to him so he wouldn't feel lonely. Mr. Lewis taught her small things, how to polish silver without scratching it, how to fix a broken broom, and even how to fold napkins in fancy shapes. She laughed and told him about her school, her toys, and how she missed her father. "He's always busy," she said once. "He says money makes the world work." Mr. Lewis smiled sadly. "Maybe, but kindness makes the world better, Emma." Those words stayed in her mind for a long time. One evening, when the sun was setting and the golden light filled the big hall, Emma and Mr. Lewis were sitting quietly near the stairs. She handed him a sandwich wrapped in a napkin. "You have to promise not to tell anyone," she said. He nodded with a little laugh. Our little secret. They didn't know that someone was watching them from far away, the security guard standing near the cameras. The next morning, in his huge office filled with glass and gold, Richard Dawson, the billionaire himself, sat in front of his screen. He had been checking security footage when something caught his attention. There, on the screen, was his daughter, giving food to the janitor. His expression changed. He leaned forward, watching every second of it. "What is this?" he whispered to himself. His pride burned inside him. To him, class and status were everything. He believed helping workers blurred the line between who gives orders and who takes them. He sat back in his chair, angry and confused. My daughter feeding a janitor? But Richard didn't call Emma that day. He stayed silent, pretending he didn't know. Inside, though, his mind was racing. He wanted to see how far she would go. Would she disobey him again? Would she keep meeting the man? He decided to wait and test her. Meanwhile, Emma continued her small acts of kindness. She felt happy every time Mr. Lewis smiled. He started to call her his little friend, and sometimes he told her stories that sounded like fairy tales, stories of courage, of people who stood up for what was right even when others told them not to. She didn't realize it, but those stories were shaping her heart. Days turned into weeks and their friendship grew, but something was about to change. One morning, when Emma went to the hall as usual, she noticed Mr. Lewis looked worried. "Are you okay?" she asked. He hesitated before answering. "Just tired, Emma. Some people here don't like me much." She frowned. "Who?" He smiled sadly. "Doesn't matter. You just keep that kind heart of yours. The world needs more of that." She didn't understand what he meant then, but soon she would, because someone else had been watching too, someone who was about to end their secret kindness. That night, as the mansion lights went dark, the security footage from the hall was quietly sent to Richard Dawson's private email. And by morning, Mr. Lewis's name would no longer be on the workers' list. Emma's little secret was about to become a storm that would shake the entire Dawson family. Part 2. In the following days, the Dawson mansion felt different to Emma. The hallways that once echoed with laughter now felt too quiet. The maids whispered more than usual, and the servants looked nervous whenever Mr. Dawson passed by. Emma didn't understand why. She only knew that every morning she looked for Mr. Lewis, and every morning he smiled at her like a friend who carried a secret. But something in his eyes had changed. There was worry behind the kindness. One afternoon, Emma sneaked out of her room with a small lunchbox she had hidden under her coat. She tiptoed past the kitchen, grabbed an apple from the counter, and went straight to the main hall where Mr. Lewis usually worked. She found him kneeling beside a broken vase, carefully picking up the pieces. "Mr. Lewis," she whispered. "You didn't eat again?" He looked up, his face tired. "It's okay, Emma, I'm fine." "No, you're not," she said, placing the lunchbox beside him. "You can't work all day without food." He smiled weakly. "You're too kind for someone your age." Emma shrugged. "You said kindness makes the world better. I just want to help." He looked at her for a long moment, then said softly, "Sometimes helping others can make powerful people angry, Emma. Promise me, if someone finds out, you won't get in trouble for me." She frowned. Why would anyone be angry about helping? Mr. Lewis didn't answer. He just sighed and went back to cleaning. Later that night, Mr. Dawson was sitting in his office scrolling through reports on his tablet. His assistant, a serious man named Mr. Clark, entered quietly. "Sir," he said, "you might want to see this." He handed Richard a small flash drive. Richard plugged it in and leaned closer to the screen. The footage showed his daughter again, kneeling beside the janitor, handing him food, smiling. Then she said those words that echoed through his mind. "Here, nobody will know." Richard's jaw tightened. "Nobody will know," he repeated slowly. He leaned back in his chair and stared out the window. He wasn't just angry, he was embarrassed. "What if the staff sees this?" he muttered. "My daughter feeding the janitor like a beggar. What would people think of me?" Mr. Clark stayed silent for a moment, then said, "Should I handle it, sir?" Richard nodded slowly. "Yes. I want him gone by tomorrow morning, quietly." The next day, Emma ran to the hall, carrying a small plate of cookies she had baked with the cook. But Mr. Lewis wasn't there. His cleaning cart was missing, and the bucket by the corner was gone. She waited, thinking maybe he was working in another wing. After half an hour, she went to the laundry room, then the garden, then the garage. Nowhere. Panic filled her little chest. Finally, she asked one of the maids, "Where's Mr. Lewis?" The maid looked uncomfortable. He doesn't work here anymore, dear." Emma's eyes widened. "What? Why?" The maid shook her head quickly. "I don't know. Your father said it was time for him to go." Emma ran straight to her father's office. Richard Dawson was standing near his desk talking on the phone. She burst through the door. "Dad, why did you fire Mr. Lewis?" Richard frowned. "Emma, not now. No! Tell me why!" she shouted, her voice trembling. He hung up the phone and stared at her coldly. "Because he was taking advantage of you." "That's not true," she cried. "He's my friend." "Friends?" Richard's tone turned sharp. "He's a janitor, Emma. We don't make friends with the staff. You're a Dawson. You don't understand how the world works yet." Tears filled her eyes. "He's not just a janitor. He's kind, and he works harder than anyone here. You didn't even ask him what happened." "Enough!" Richard's voice thundered across the room. "I said it's over. You will not speak to that man again." Emma stood frozen, her small hands clenched at her sides. For the first time, she wasn't afraid of her father. She was disappointed. She looked at him and whispered, "You're wrong." Then she turned and ran out before he could say another word. That night, she couldn't sleep. She sat on her bed, staring out at the city lights through her window. Somewhere out there, Mr. Lewis was alone, and she didn't even get to say goodbye. She remembered the stories he told her, the ones about brave people doing what was right, even when it was hard. "Sometimes helping others can make powerful people angry," he had said. Now she understood what he meant. Emma wiped her tears and made a decision. The next morning before sunrise, she sneaked into her father's office. She searched the drawers until she found a small notebook with a list of employees. Her heart raced when she saw Mr. Lewis's full name and address written beside it. She copied it onto a piece of paper and tucked it into her pocket. She looked around the office one last time, whispering to herself, "I'll find him, and I'll help him again, even if nobody knows." As she walked back to her room, the first light of dawn touched the golden frames on the walls. The house was silent, but inside Emma's heart, a quiet fire had started to burn, something stronger than fear, something that even her billionaire father couldn't control. Part 3. The next morning came with heavy clouds, as if the sky itself knew something was wrong. Emma woke up early, dressed quietly, and slipped the folded paper with Mr. Lewis's address into her small backpack. She didn't know exactly what she would do, but she knew one thing for sure: she had to see him. She couldn't stop thinking about how her father had treated him, how unfair it was. Her heart hurt every time she remembered Mr. Lewis's gentle smile. She waited until the house grew busy with morning routines. The maids were rushing through the hallways, and her father had already left for a meeting downtown. Emma saw her chance. She ran down the back stairs and asked the driver, Mr. Frank, "Can you take me to this address?" "Please don't tell my father. It's a surprise." The driver hesitated, glancing at the paper. He'd worked for the Dawsons for years and loved Emma like his own child. After a long moment, he sighed. "All right, Miss Emma, but we come back quickly." "Understood?" Emma nodded eagerly, and they drove through the busy streets of New York. As they left the shiny part of the city, the buildings became smaller, older, and grayer. The sidewalks were cracked, and people moved slowly, wrapped in worn coats. Emma had never seen this part of town before. It felt like another world, one that her father's money had never touched. Finally, the car stopped in front of a small apartment building with faded bricks and broken steps. Mr. Frank looked at her with concern. "You sure about this, miss?" he asked. Emma nodded. "Yes, I'll just be a minute." She climbed the stairs and knocked softly on the door with the number 3B. There was silence for a few seconds. Then a weak voice said, "Coming." The door opened, and there stood Mr. Lewis. He looked surprised, his eyes wide as he saw her standing there in her fancy coat and shiny shoes. "Emma, what are you doing here?" She smiled shyly. I came to see you. I wanted to say sorry for what my father did. Mr. Lewis sighed, shaking his head. You shouldn't be here, sweetheart. If your father finds out, I don't care, she interrupted. You didn't do anything wrong. He did. Before he could answer, a gentle voice came from inside the apartment. Who's at the door, John? Emma peeked inside and saw a thin woman lying on a small couch, covered with a blanket. Her face looked pale but kind. Mr. Lewis stepped aside. Emma, this is my wife Mary. Emma walked in quietly. The room was small and old but clean. There was hardly any furniture, just a table, 2 chairs, and a lamp that flickered a little. The air smelled of medicine and tea. Emma looked around and asked softly, Are you both okay? Mary smiled faintly. We manage, dear. Your friend here works too hard, but he takes good care of me. Mr. Lewis placed a gentle hand on her shoulder. She shouldn't see this place, he murmured, but Mary shook her head. No, John, it's all right. She should know the truth. Emma looked up at him with sad eyes. You were a teacher, right? He nodded slowly. Once, before the school closed, before everything. He didn't need to finish the sentence. She understood. Life had taken away more than money. It had taken away chances. She opened her backpack and pulled out the lunchbox she had packed from home. I brought something for both of you. Mr. Lewis looked like he might cry. Emma, you shouldn't have done that. She smiled. It's okay. Nobody will know. They all sat together, and for the first time in a long while, Mr. Lewis and his wife shared a meal that wasn't just bread or soup. Emma listened to their stories, their dreams, their struggles, their hopes. The time passed quickly, and soon she realized the sun was setting. Mr. Frank knocked on the door. Miss Emma, we should go. It's getting late. Emma stood up slowly. I'll come back soon, she promised. Mr. Lewis shook his head gently. You've done enough, Emma. Just stay safe. That's all I want. She hugged him tightly. You always told me kindness makes the world better. I believe that now. As she walked down the steps, she didn't see the black car parked across the street. Inside, a man in a dark suit watched her leave. He picked up his phone and said, Mr. Dawson, we found her. She's at the janitor's house. Back at the Dawson mansion, Richard listened in silence as the report came through. His jaw clenched, his pride bruised deeper than ever. Bring her home, he said coldly. But when he hung up, he didn't move for a long time. Something about the report bothered him. The part about the sick wife, the part about his daughter bringing food. For the first time, he began to wonder if he had been wrong. Later that evening, Emma returned home, pretending nothing had happened. Her father was standing in the living room waiting. Where were you? He asked sharply. She froze, realizing he knew. But before she could answer, he raised his hand, not to hit, but to silence her. You went to his house. You defied me again. Tears filled her eyes. He's not what you think. He's a good man. His wife is sick. He used to be a teacher. You don't even know him. Richard's voice was calm but cold. Enough. You are forbidden to leave this house without my permission. She turned away, whispering, You can stop me, but you can't make me think like you. Her father didn't answer. He stood still, watching her walk away, her small figure disappearing up the stairs. For the first time in his life, Richard Dawson felt something unfamiliar, guilt. And that feeling was about to change everything. Part 4. The next few days passed in silence inside the Dawson mansion. Emma stopped talking to her father, and Richard tried to act like nothing had happened. The house staff noticed the tension, but no one dared to ask questions. Emma spent most of her time in her room, sitting by the window and staring out at the grey October sky. Her heart felt heavy, not just because she missed Mr. Lewis, but because of what her father had said about him. She couldn't understand how helping someone could be wrong. Downstairs, Richard was trying to focus on work, but his mind kept drifting back to what he had heard, the image of his daughter sitting beside that old janitor in the camera footage. It should have made him angry, but instead it made him feel small. He remembered his own childhood, back when his father had nothing and had taught him that kindness was a weakness. Richard had believed that all his life. But now, watching his daughter care for someone society ignored, something inside him began to crack. That night, Emma couldn't sleep. The mansion was quiet, except for the ticking of the big clock in the hall. She sat on her bed, clutching the little bracelet Mr. Lewis's wife had given her when she left their apartment. "For good luck," Mary had said with a smile. Emma held it close and whispered, "I'll help you again. I promise." The next morning she tried to talk to her mother, hoping she would understand. Mrs. Dawson was sitting in the garden with a cup of tea, reading a magazine. Emma sat beside her and said softly, "Mom, do you think it's wrong to help people who are poor?" Her mother looked up, surprised by the question. "Why do you ask, dear?" "Because Dad said I shouldn't be friends with Mr. Lewis, but he's a good man. His wife is sick." Mrs. Dawson hesitated, her expression thoughtful. "Your father just wants to protect you, Emma. Sometimes people can take advantage." Emma interrupted, shaking her head. "He didn't take anything. He only needed kindness." Before her mother could reply, Richard walked into the garden. His voice was firm. "Emma, that's enough talk about the janitor." She looked up at him, tears already forming in her eyes. "Why can't you see he's just a person who needs help?" "Because the world doesn't work that way," Richard said coldly. "If you give everything away, people will walk all over you." Emma stood, her voice trembling. "No, Dad, if you never give anything, you stop being human." For a moment the air between them was still. Mrs. Dawson looked between her husband and daughter, unsure what to say. Richard turned away without answering and went back inside, but her words echoed in his head again and again. "You stop being human." Later that evening, Richard sat alone in his office. The city lights shimmered through the tall windows. He opened his laptop and searched the employee records again. His finger hovered over Mr. Lewis's name, then he clicked it. Next to the contact details was a small note, left due to medical hardship. His eyes narrowed. "Medical hardship?" he whispered. He clicked further and found a report from the HR department explaining that Mr. Lewis had requested extra shifts to afford his wife's treatment. Richard leaned back in his chair, staring at the screen in silence. For the first time, the truth began to sink in. The next morning he called his assistant, Mr. Clark. "I want to know everything about John Lewis and his family," Richard ordered. "Where he lives, his background, everything." Mr. Clark hesitated. "Sir, I thought you wanted him gone." "I changed my mind," Richard said quietly. "Just do it." Meanwhile, Emma sat in the mansion library, drawing quietly in her notebook. She was sketching Mr. Lewis and his wife sitting together, smiling. She wanted to give it to them someday. But as she drew, she overheard two maids talking near the doorway. "I heard Mr. Dawson's asking questions about the janitor again," one whispered. "Maybe he's planning to punish him more," the other replied. Emma's heart sank. She ran to her room, panic rising inside her. She thought her father was going to make things worse for Mr. Lewis. She didn't know he was beginning to change. That evening, Richard's assistant returned with a file. Inside were photos of the apartment, medical bills, and reports about how Mr. Lewis had used all his savings for his wife's care. Richard looked through each page slowly. When he reached the photo of Emma sitting beside the couple, smiling, his eyes softened. She didn't look spoiled or foolish, she looked brave. And for the first time in years, he saw what he had lost chasing money. He closed the file and leaned back, his voice quiet. "Maybe she's right," he murmured. "Maybe I forgot what being human means." That night, Richard stood in front of Emma's bedroom door. He wanted to knock, to say something, but he couldn't. He turned away, leaving her sleeping peacefully. But inside his heart, something had changed. He wasn't ready to admit it yet, but the man who once believed kindness was weakness was beginning to remember the part of himself he had buried long ago. And soon, that forgotten part would lead him to do something that would shock everyone, even his daughter. Part 5. The next morning, the air in the Dawson mansion felt different. The usual sharp sound of Richard's shoes echoing through the halls seemed slower, heavier, almost uncertain. He had spent the entire night awake, staring at the file on Mr. Lewis. Each page had chipped away at the wall of pride he had built around his heart. He finally understood that the man he had fired wasn't weak or lazy. He was just a husband trying to save his wife. At breakfast, Emma sat quietly, picking at her food. Her father sat across from her, reading the newspaper, pretending to be calm. Mrs. Dawson tried to talk about an upcoming charity event, but the silence between father and daughter filled the room like fog. When Emma stood up to leave, Richard lowered the newspaper and said softly, "Emma." She stopped, surprised by his tone. "Yes, Dad." He hesitated, choosing his words carefully. "What was that man like?" "Mr. Lewis?" Emma blinked, not sure if it was a trick. "He was kind," she said slowly. "He worked hard. He told me stories. He didn't complain even when he was tired." Richard nodded slightly. "And his wife? She's sick?" Emma's eyes widened. "You know about her?" "I know now," he said quietly, folding the paper. "I shouldn't have judged him before I knew the truth." For a moment, Emma just stared at him. She had never heard her father admit he was wrong, not to anyone. She wanted to say something, but before she could, he stood up and said, "I have to go to the office." Then he left, leaving her confused but hopeful. Later that day, Richard drove through the same old neighborhood his daughter had visited days earlier. His expensive black car looked out of place on the cracked road. When he reached the small apartment building, he stepped out and looked up at the faded number 3B. For a long time he stood there, uncertain, then finally knocked. The door opened slowly, and Mr. Lewis stood there, shocked. "Mr. Dawson," he said in disbelief. "What are you doing here?" Richard looked around the small, dim apartment, feeling the weight of guilt settle deeper in his chest. "I came to see you," he said simply. "May I come in?" Mr. Lewis hesitated for a moment, then stepped aside. Inside, Richard saw the truth with his own eyes. The broken furniture, the empty medicine bottles, the weak woman on the couch trying to smile politely. It was far from the world he lived in, but it was real. It was human. "I owe you an apology," Richard said quietly. Mr. Lewis looked at him, surprised. "You don't owe me anything, sir." "Yes, I do," Richard insisted. "I fired you without understanding your situation." "That was wrong. My daughter, she saw something I didn't." Mr. Lewis smiled faintly. "Your daughter is a rare soul. She reminds me of my students back when I was teaching. Curious, full of heart. You should be proud of her." Richard swallowed hard. "I am. More than she knows." Mary coughed softly and Richard turned to her. "Do you have medical support?" he asked. Mr. Lewis shook his head. "We go to the free clinic when we can, but the line is long and the medicine costs too much." Richard didn't reply immediately. He looked around again, at the tiny table, the old curtains, the small fan struggling to work. This was how the people who worked for him lived, while he sat in a mansion complaining about profit margins. Something inside him broke. He took out his wallet, pulled a business card, and handed it to Mr. Lewis. "Tomorrow morning, come to my office. Bring your wife's medical papers. I think I can help." Mr. Lewis hesitated. "Sir, I don't want pity." Richard shook his head. "This isn't pity. It's respect. You've worked harder than most men I know." As he turned to leave, Mary said softly, "Thank you, Mr. Dawson, for listening." He nodded and left quietly, his thoughts heavy. That evening, Emma waited by the living room window, watching the driveway anxiously. When her father's car finally arrived, she ran to the door. "Where were you?" she asked quickly. Richard smiled faintly. "I had a meeting, a very important one." "With who?" He crouched to her level, his eyes softer than she had ever seen. "With an old friend of yours." Her face lit up. "Mr. Lewis?" He nodded. "Yes, and his wife. I think we can help them now." Emma's eyes filled with tears of happiness. "You mean it?" "I do," he said gently. "Sometimes it takes a child to remind a man how to be a decent human being." She threw her arms around him, hugging him tightly. For the first time in years, Richard hugged her back, not as a businessman, not as a father trying to control everything, but as a man who finally understood what mattered. Later that night, Emma sat in her bed smiling through tears. Down the hall, Richard sat in his study, signing a new document, one that would cover all of Mary Lewis's medical bills. He also made a note to call his lawyers in the morning about starting a new community program in his company. He looked at his daughter's drawing of the janitor and his wife, which she had left on his desk earlier that week. He smiled faintly and whispered to himself, "You were right, Emma. Kindness does make the world better." But outside the mansion, something else was already moving, something bigger than kindness alone. The media was about to find out what he had done, and the story that started with a small act of secret kindness was about to become something that would shock the entire city. Part 6. The next morning, sunlight spilled through the glass walls of the Dawson Enterprises tower, reflecting off silver desks and the polished marble floor. The office buzzed with its usual rhythm, phones ringing, employees hurrying to meetings, and assistants whispering near the elevators. But something unusual was happening on the top floor. Richard Dawson, known for being strict and emotionless, had called an urgent meeting with his board members and senior managers. When he walked in, everyone stood. He looked different that morning, not angry, not distant, just calm, as if he had made a decision that gave him peace. "Please sit down," he said. His voice was firm but lighter than usual. The room fell silent. "I want to talk about change," Richard began. "For years, we've built this company on strength, competition, and control. We've become successful, yes, but somewhere along the way, we forgot something important: people." The executives glanced at each other, confused. They had never heard him speak like this before. "Yesterday," he continued, "I visited one of our former employees, John Lewis. Some of you might remember him, the janitor." Murmurs spread across the table. Richard raised a hand to quiet them. He wasn't just a janitor. He was a man doing his best to care for his sick wife. "And I fired him without knowing his story. That was my mistake." His assistant, Mr. Clark, looked stunned. "Sir, do you want me to—" "Yes," Richard interrupted gently. "I want him back, but not as a janitor. I want him to lead a new program, something we'll call the Lewis Initiative. It will provide education, housing, and healthcare for workers and their families who need help. We'll start with the people who clean our offices and drive our cars, the ones we never notice." The room went silent. Nobody spoke. Richard's voice softened. "My daughter taught me something this company forgot, that kindness isn't weakness. It's strength, and I intend to prove it." After the meeting ended, news began to spread quietly through the building. The billionaire who never smiled had done something nobody expected. By noon, whispers reached the lower floors, and the cleaning staff gathered near the hallways, wondering if it was true. Meanwhile, in a small apartment across the city, Mr. Lewis was helping his wife with her breakfast when he received a phone call. "Mr. Lewis," a voice said, "this is Dawson Enterprises. Mr. Dawson would like to see you today." He froze. "You must be mistaken." "No, sir," the assistant replied. "He said to tell you personally that you have a new position waiting." Mr. Lewis stared at the phone, unable to speak. His wife looked at him, confused. "What is it, John?" He smiled slowly, eyes shining with disbelief. "It's a miracle, Mary. The man who fired me wants me back." A few hours later, Richard stood by the window in his office, watching the city skyline. When the door opened, he turned around. Mr. Lewis entered, wearing his clean blue uniform and holding his old cap in his hands. "Mr. Dawson," he said quietly, "thank you for calling me." Richard stepped forward, extending his hand. "I owe you an apology, and I owe you a future. Sit, please." Mr. Lewis sat down carefully, still unsure if this was real. Richard explained the plan, the foundation, the healthcare program, and the position he wanted Mr. Lewis to lead. When he finished, Mr. Lewis was silent for a long moment. "Sir," he finally said, "I don't know what to say." "Just say you'll help me do it right," Richard replied with a small smile. "You've lived it. You know what people need more than I ever could." Mr. Lewis nodded slowly. "Then I'll help. Not for me, but for the others who are still struggling. That same evening, Richard arrived home early. Emma ran to him, her face bright. "Dad, you're home before dinner." He laughed softly. "Yes, and I have something to show you." He took out a folded document and handed it to her. It read, "The Lewis Initiative, founded by Dawson Enterprises." Her eyes widened as she read the words. "You named it after him?" Richard smiled. "After both of you, actually. Because you were the one who started all this." She looked up at him, eyes shining with pride and love. "I'm proud of you, Dad." He knelt down, placing a hand on her shoulder. "No, Emma, I'm proud of you. You reminded me that being rich means nothing if you forget what it means to care." They hugged tightly, and for the first time there were no walls between them, just a father and daughter who finally understood each other. But outside, the story was spreading fast. News reporters had already caught wind of the sudden company change. By morning, headlines would appear everywhere. "Billionaire admits mistake, hires janitor to lead new foundation, and the girl who changed her father's heart." And as the city buzzed with the shocking news, one thing became clear. Emma's secret kindness had not just changed one man's life, but had started a wave of compassion that would soon touch thousands. In the quiet of that evening, Richard stood on the balcony, watching the city lights. He thought of his old self, cold, proud, blind to others, and felt grateful that a small act of kindness had opened his eyes. "Sometimes," he whispered to himself, "it takes the smallest light to show the biggest truth." Inside, Emma's laughter filled the mansion once more, not as an echo of loneliness, but as a sound of healing, hope, and the beginning of something beautiful. Part 7. The next morning, the city was already alive with noise. Car horns, news vans, and flashes of cameras outside the Dawson Enterprises building. Overnight, the story had gone viral. Every major news channel was running the same headline: "Billionaire changes heart after daughter's act of kindness, hires janitor to lead charity foundation." Reporters camped outside the main gate, trying to get a glimpse of Richard Dawson or the mysterious young girl who had inspired him. It was chaos, but inside the Dawson mansion, peace filled the air for the first time in years. Emma sat by the kitchen table, swinging her legs, watching her father's name appear on TV. She smiled proudly. "They're talking about you again, Dad," she said. "But this time it's nice," Richard chuckled. "Yes, it seems the world finally found something good to say about me." He poured himself coffee, but his eyes softened as he looked at his daughter. "You know, Emma, I never thought kindness could make such noise." Emma grinned. "Maybe the world needed to hear it, Dad." Just then the doorbell rang. Their housekeeper hurried to answer, then returned looking surprised. "Sir, it's Mr. Lewis and his wife." Richard quickly stood up. "Please show them in." When Mr. Lewis and Mary entered, Emma's eyes lit up. "Mr. Lewis!" she cried, running to hug him. He laughed warmly, patting her head. "Ah, my little secret helper." Richard smiled, motioning for them to sit. "I'm glad you came. I wasn't sure if the reporters outside would let you through," Mr. Lewis chuckled. "They tried, but one of your guards helped. Seems like everyone's on your side now." Mary, looking much healthier, smiled kindly. "We just wanted to thank you, both of you. The doctors say I'm responding to the new treatment. Without your help, I don't know if I'd be here." Richard nodded. "You don't owe me thanks. This all started because of my daughter. I just followed her lead," Emma blushed. "I just wanted to help." "And you did," Mary said softly. "You reminded all of us that compassion still exists." As they talked, the door opened again. This time it was a man with a camera crew and a microphone. "Mr. Dawson, NBC News," he said. "Would you be willing to give a short statement about the Lewis Initiative?" Richard hesitated, but Emma whispered, "Dad, maybe you should. So more people can help others too." He smiled at her, then turned to the camera crew. "All right," he said, "but only if you promise to tell the real story." The camera rolled. The reporter asked, "Mr. Dawson, the world is calling you a changed man. What made you start this foundation?" Richard looked straight into the camera. "It started with a little girl's kindness. My daughter saw a man who was struggling, a man I failed to see as more than his job. She helped him in secret, not for attention, but because it was the right thing to do. When I found out, I was angry at first, but then I realized she was right. She saw something I had forgotten, that success means nothing if you can't lift others with you, the reporter asked. And what do you hope to achieve with the Lewis Initiative? Richard's voice grew steady and strong. I want to change the way people in power see those who work for them. No one should feel invisible. Every janitor, driver, cleaner, and guard deserves dignity. This is not charity, it's justice. The room went quiet for a moment. Even the camera crew lowered their lenses in respect. Then the reporter turned to Emma. And you, young lady, how does it feel to inspire your father and the world? Emma smiled shyly. I didn't try to inspire anyone. I just didn't want Mr. Lewis to be sad. Everyone laughed softly, and even Richard couldn't stop smiling. That, he said proudly, is exactly what the world needs. More people who care without expecting anything back. The interview aired that same evening, and within hours, millions of people had watched it. Donations started pouring in from all over the country. People began sharing their own stories of kindness, small gestures, big changes. The Lewis Initiative became more than a foundation. It became a movement. Other companies started launching similar programs. Struggling families got help. Schools and hospitals received funding. A single act of compassion had turned into a wave of hope. One evening, months later, as the sun set behind the city skyline, Richard stood on the balcony with Emma by his side. The wind was soft, carrying the distant hum of life. "Dad?" Emma said quietly. "Do you think Mr. Lewis and Mary are happy now?" Richard smiled. "I think they are, and I think your kindness made them believe in good again." She leaned against him, her head on his arm. "Do you think people will keep being kind now?" He looked out over the city, where lights flickered like tiny stars. "I think so," he said softly, "because one act of kindness can change everything, if it comes from the heart." And as the world moved forward, somewhere deep inside, the little girl who once secretly helped a janitor had unknowingly changed not just her father, but the hearts of millions, proving that even the smallest kindness can spark a light bright enough to heal the world. The story that began with a secret now ended with a promise. That compassion, once awakened, never truly dies. It only grows, spreading from one soul to another endlessly.